Hello everyone. For this tutorial, I'd like to explain the final option in Blender called Compositing, which is optional because you do not need it 100% in order to actually make your product, unlike the other options. It is simply there for extra polish and details if you feel that you need and/or want it. You will note if you click on Add or Node, almost all the options are grayed out, which means that they are not available or that you can't use them. What you do to fix this is click Use Nodes, and then you will see some nodes already exist by default. The first node is an input for the render layers, and the second node is an output for the overall composition, called Composite for short. The render layers is self-explanatory and means the layers that are used for rendering your image. And the composite is also pretty self-explanatory and simply means a composition of all the inputs and effects combined together. And now, when you click on the Add menu, you'll see all the options are white, which means you can click on them. The first menu, Input, gives you a list of inputs. Many of them I do not find especially useful, however, for most applications, so I advocate simply using Image, Movie Clip for an animated image, or Render Layers for the overall amount of layers. As other options like Texture either do not use anything particularly useful or basically repeat the same features that other images like Image already have. By similar reasoning, for the output, I would advocate you simply use Composite, as all the other ones I do not believe have any practical use. The next option, Color, is used to alter the colors in whatever is being fed into it, with the options being alpha over, brightness versus contrast, color balance, color correction, exposure amount or light intensity, gamma correction, hue saturation value, invert the colors, mix other color blenders, posterize the colors, adjust the RGB values according to curves, use a tone map, or Z combine. The next menu is a list of generic converters rather than color-specific filters. In a particular alpha convert, use a color space, use a color ramp, combine HSVA, combine RGBA, combine YCBCRA, combine YUVA, make an ID mask, use a generic math filter, convert RGB to black and white only, separate HSVA, separate RGBA, separate YCBCRA, separate YUVA, set alpha, or switch view. The next list is a list of filters, so you can anti-alias or remove edges, bilateral blur, regular blur, bokeh blur, defocus, denoise, despeckle, dilate/erode, direction specific blur, use a generic filter, add glare, in paint, make the image more pixelated, add sunbeams, or use a blur generated by vector math. The next list, vectors, I do not believe has any practical usage, as all the other filters are much more easier and straightforward to use. The next list, matte, I do not believe has much use either. And the next list, distort, simply distorts the image using a specific transform. In particular, corner pin, crop the image, or cut it until it's only a specific dimensions, displace the image, flip the image, use a lens type distortion, use a map UV, use movie type distortion, deform it using a plane track, rotate it, scale it, stabilize it 2D style, using a generic transform, or translate/move it. The next option, group, is more used for organizational purposes rather than actually changing anything particular about your render. And the last option, layout, I have never actually used myself either, so I do not teach it. Now that I've explained the list of all the filters that are used in compositing your image, I can explain how to actually hook the whole thing together. You will notice with the default nodes, there is a render layers hooked directly to the composite, like so. You will also notice that the software is particular about what is hooked to what. For example, things that are used to alter the image or render the image can only be hooked to image outputs. They cannot be hooked to anything else. And so you will see everything is color coded for your convenience, telling you what matches with what. So for example, you can hook the alpha on render layers to either the alpha on the composition or the Z on the composition. And you cannot assume that the names alone have to match. You can match different names, they just have to be the same color. Now that I've explained how compositing your special effects works, I can discontinue my tutorials on Blender, as I have touched on all of the most important features that you will need for making video games, and work on teaching the most complicated part of making video games, which is programming games in 3D rather than 2D. As the mathematics involved in making 3D games is much more intensive than the mathematics involved in making 2D games. As you might have been able to guess by noticing how the 3D geometry in Blender is much more detailed and intensive than the simple 2D geometry in Photoshop. See you then.